Good morning, church. As we begin, I want to thank you for your giving and for the ways in which you give. If you're new to Bethany, there are boxes in the back that you can put a check or money in, and there's also a QR code that you can use to give through our app, and we are so grateful for those of you who choose to support Bethany in that way. Well, this is a moment where I feel like I need to take a deep, cleansing breath. Bethany, and I love this about us, is what the people in our denomination call a purple church, which means that there are red and blue Democrats, Republicans in this church. We love our diversity. It's a beautiful thing. It can also serve as a challenge, and sometimes it has been for us as a church. Many of you today come celebrating the results of this past week and all that happened, and some of you come with another whole range of emotions, fear or grief or anger, whatever they are. I want to tell you up front, you may have feelings about this, I didn't vote for either candidate. I voted for my wife.
She would have been good.
That is honest to God the truth. She's balanced our budget every year. She is a fantastic problem solver. She's raised 3 marvelous kids, and I believe that she has the power to look some world bullies in the face and tell them to sit down and be quiet. More importantly, I think I would make a fantastic first gentleman. And I was kind of hoping for that. I would have encouraged her to run, but we didn't have the $400 million to $1 billion it takes to run an election these days. More seriously, early on in life as I was reflecting this week, I realized that no one had taught me what it means to celebrate or to grieve. I thought I knew. I mean, how hard can it be? I was a pastor for nearly 30 years when my dad died 4 years ago. Having walked through so many other people and loss, I had no idea how unprepared I was in grief. Not every culture does it the same. I was raised that grief and celebration are actually a lot alike. They're treated almost exactly the same, grief and celebration. We have a ceremony, we eat, and about a week later, whatever your source of happiness or sadness was, it's supposed to go away and surrender to the rest of life. When my daughter graduated from college last year, I realized that I had grown in my understandings of celebration and grief, but that I had a lot to learn. I tend to be a person of action. When things happen, I tend to ask the question, what's next, not what's now? And rather than pausing and see who I am or what's actually happened, I tend to be a human doing rather than a human being. Recently, God has reminded me in several important contexts of the importance of being present, of paying attention to my soul. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're emotional, though you can certainly be emotional. It distinguishes between them. It means reflecting with faith. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 26, Samantha, would you put that up for me? It should be back there. Jesus says, and what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? What a question. Is anything worth more than your soul? Now, truth be told, though the scripture and this question is so powerful, and though I knew it from a very, very early age, I will confess to you that I didn't know what my soul was. I could tell you what my mind was. I could tell you what my heart was. I couldn't tell you what my soul was. It was just a thing. It was a thing that when you died, your soul lived, but it was a thing. I couldn't tell you. I could point to other parts of my body, head, shoulders, knees and toes. But nowhere in that song does it say soul. I couldn't point to it. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what to think about it. I didn't know how it acted or interacted in my life around me. But I did know that I had one, and I knew that it was affected by the events and the people around me. That much I could tell, I could feel. And in moments of both joy and sorrow, in moments of celebration and grief, my soul has been affected by that. And I have been taught, as many of you have, to recognize my thoughts and my emotions, but not my soul. So I came to understand that my soul was made up of my mind and my emotions. But more importantly, I had to add to this my Andrewness. That's not your soul, that's mine. My Andrewness. And that life force that God gives to us. Those elements together make up my soul. And so the idea that you can do things that violate your soul, or that bring life to your soul, or that enrich it, or enlarge it, or that can tear it down, or fragment it, or disintegrate it, pull it into various parts, I was never taught or understood. And so as we come to this moment, I don't want to tell you how to feel, or how to think, or what to do. I'd like to share with you some of the things that I've learned and I'm still learning about what it means to understand that my soul is walking through this life and encountering it. And the scripture has some guidance about that. Would you put up the verse from the psalm that we're looking at today? In Psalm 46, the psalmist says this: "Be still and know that I am God. I will be honored by every nation. I will be honored throughout the world. Be still and know that I am God." You can take that down. Yes, I'll get to that later. Somewhere there's either an invitation or a command to be still and know that God is God. In circles of spirituality, some would call that stillness necessary. Jerry Seinfeld has publicly said that the only thing that got him through the craziness of a career in television was that he would daily meditate. He would have stillness. To be still, what a thought. To live in a world where we disengage from outside stimuli. We have become so used to bombarding ourselves with stimuli and others doing that for us that we're distracted, numbed, running, doing, full of inputs that are speaking to our hearts, our minds, and our souls. And in the family I grew up in the culture I grew up in, and not all of you were taught that way, but I was taught to pay more attention to the outside than the inside. And that's an important skill to be able to soldier through. How many of you have ever had to soldier through before? Like, regardless of how you feel, regardless of what's going on, you just have to keep pushing. And there are some times when that's true. And then there are times when there are transitions or emotional events or crises or celebrations. And usually, in the culture I grew up in, I was not taught to be still in those moments. In fact, I was taught just the opposite. You scream or shout, whether it's happy or sad. You engage in some fashion. You participate. But stillness is a different thing, isn't it? In fact, I asked myself the question this week, when's the last time I was just still? Now, I don't mean simply my body. I'm a pretty good couch potato when I need to be. When's the last time that you tried to still your mind? When's the last time that you tried to still your heart? Stillness is hard. Some of you are excellent at reflection. When you have a quiet moment by yourself, and by the way, when you have young children, it's hard to find those, isn't it? But when you have a moment to yourself, some of you are really good at reflection. And as soon as you have an opportunity to stop for a moment, you do that. You find yourself in the moment and your mind goes nuts. It starts processing all this stuff, all the stuff of your day and the week and all that. And that is fantastic, but it's not stillness. As a matter of fact, have you ever had this experience where you laid down at night to go to sleep and all of a sudden your mind turned on? It's horrific, isn't it? It's like, don't you wish you had an on-off button sometimes for your mind? Yeah. And so the opportunity to be still is more than just our body stopping or no longer having our earbuds in or no longer having the television on. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. Stillness is when you not only begin to stop the input that's coming into your body, but it's also when you sit long enough that the mind begins to quiet itself and the emotions begin to quiet themselves. And when you sit in silence long enough, your soul begins to speak. But your soul is crowded out by all those other voices. And we very rarely give it the space and the time to do that, in part because we don't like stillness or silence. We human beings are very uncomfortable with it. I teach a class at Hopkins that has about 20 students each in it. And sometimes I'll ask them a question and they won't answer. And I don't mind torturing them because they're graduate students. And I'll just stand there and I'll wait. Human beings are so uncomfortable with silence that eventually someone will say something. There have been times when I've asked the pastors to sit and just be silent as long as we can. It's amazing how long 10 minutes can be when you're doing absolutely nothing. It feels like an eternity. All these things start to rush in on you. Our mind becomes hyper attentive to its surroundings. You hear everything, you feel everything, you notice everything, you notice your own breathing. You're like, man, I'm a loud breather. Sometimes you can sense your own heartbeat. And our souls find rest in that silence and stillness. They are regularly trying to speak to us and constantly trying to get their 2 kids at home. She had an autistic son at home, and she had a grandson a grandson that she'd adopted as a son who was 9 years old at home. And the house was just crazy, and she's like, I can't get any peace or stillness. And a few months later, all but one person moved out. And then she called me and she's like, the house is too empty. I'm like, which is it, Mama? Which is it? She's like, when he goes off to school, there's no one. It's just quiet. And what she was really saying is, I'm alone in this house. And all the thoughts and the feelings and the things that I have not taken time to reflect on, like the death of her husband, the growing up and the leaving of her children, the birth of grandchildren, the changes in the world. Her soul had not caught up with all the change. And suddenly, in the stillness and the silence, it all came rushing in, and it was too much. And we as human beings walk that constant road between wanting all that wonderful stimuli and getting our dopamine dumps. And you guys have become more familiar with scientific lingo than many generations ever have. And then on the other end of it, when we get that, we realize how much stuff is actually in there. We've collected it along the way, but we've never processed it or thought about it or understood it. And so the psalmist says, be still. And the second part is, and know. And know. Be still and know. And some of you know this, and some of you are going to shake your heads at what I'm telling you, and others of you don't. Because stillness actually has a purpose to it. It allows us to reconnect our parts. For many of us, we envision stillness as just that moment on the beach when all we hear are the waves and everything else fades away. But underneath it all is still everything that we have. And to know is to begin to reconnect our parts and see how they're working between each other and how the things inside of us are affecting us. I had an idea of what my life would be like when I became a father. I'm the oldest of 11. I've changed more baby diapers than most human beings before I ever had my own children. I had an idea of what it was like to be the supervisor of a child. I had no idea what it was like to actually be a dad. And the really interesting thing that's happening to me as I speak is that I am on the verge of being an empty nester. Very soon, my children will have moved out. And one of the things that I love about my life is being a dad. And I will always be a dad, but my children will not always be home for me to be a dad to them. And something inside my soul is going, I don't like that. I'm going to miss it. That's going to be really, really hard. And the powerful thing about our souls is there's a complexity to them. Our souls have this depth to it that allows and enables us to have multiple things happening at the same time, which is why they can be so mysterious and confusing. Someone will come to you and say, did you have a good day or a bad day? And when I think about it, it's rarely just one or the other. Some of the things that happened inside my soul were a blessing and exciting. And some of the things that happened inside my soul were hard and challenging. But I forget that I'm still carrying some things in my soul that go all the way back to my childhood. I'm taking them with me along the way. My soul has the ability to feel success and despair at the same time, euphoria and helplessness at the same time. And all this stands in the backdrop of our values and what's important to us. But we can pay so little attention. We collect these events as though we're collecting seashells without ever processing them. We just stick them in our bag and move on. But that's not really how we function as human beings. And so we come to a graduation and we gather for the ceremony and we sit through the speakers and the music and the names and the diplomas and the people walking across the stage. And yet what's really happened is that a human being has entered another phase of their lives, another chapter. And they were so focused on their papers and their exams and their friends and the planning and all that their soul may not have caught up to the fact that something has ended and they may not even be sure what the new thing beginning is. And sometimes we don't help them with that. We don't teach them what that looks like. That relationships are going to be ending. Community is going to be changing. You're going to be moving to a new place and a new space. And it's going to be both fun and beautiful and challenging and hard. And your soul has to process all that stuff. And generally what we do is give ourselves at most a few days to walk it through. And maybe it's just become I'm a man or the time that I grew up in, but no one told me that it might take me years to get over the loss of my dad. Or that living into a new phase of my life might be hard. I've watched men, the hardest thing they faced in their entire life has been retirement. They work and work and work and work, and then they retire and they're like, now what do I do? You know what most men do after they retire? Go back to work. When a baby's born, it's hard to imagine how it will upend your life, how it will make you feel, how it will change the way that you relate to the world. When you have a job or lose a job, how it changes you. When you lose a friend or a parent, or when somebody moves out of your life, or when you move into a new stage of life, it changes the you-ness of you. How you react and respond to the world. Stillness has a purpose. It's to be still and know. It's to know who we are and what's happening to us and the world around us. And not just us, but the people around us. And not just the people around us, but God. Because the psalmist says, be still and know that I am God. And in the psalm, the psalmist is inviting us to do at least two things. And the first is to reflect with faith. We don't reflect as though we're facing all of this by ourselves. Our soul is not alone. To have faith is to believe that the God of the universe is with us and sometimes guides us through our own soul, whom we are oftentimes unaware of what's really happening there. It's a moment where the soul is called to trust in God. The soul is called not to worry about tomorrow. That was what Jesus said, right? Because I am here, you do not need to worry about tomorrow. The soul is challenged by our Lord to rejoice in the Lord always, even in sorrow. What does that mean for our soul? Remember the complexity of it and its ability to hold multiple things at the same time? What does that mean for us? The God whose fingerprints are all over us, the God who made us and shaped us, calls us to step into roles and places and personhoods we didn't know could exist. And he tells us that he is here with us, and he asks us to be still and know not only who we are, but who he is in the middle of it. And that the soul has the freedom to know that God is God. God is faithful, God is strong, God is present, God is help, God is hope. To reflect with faith. But the second thing, and oh, this is so important, is that it is a reminder to us and to our souls that we are not God. Be still and know that I am God. And you know, sometimes you and I feel the weight of the world, or the weight of our kids, or the weight of our job, or the weight of so many things. And God is saying, remember, it's me who's God. You can't fix everything. Do you need me to say that again? You can't fix everything. You're not God. That person desperately that you want to change, that person desperately that you want to fix, you can't fix them. Do you know who can? Yes. Do you know who can heal? Do you know who can guide? And we human beings who have such a struggle with control, is anyone willing to admit their struggle with control? We human beings who struggle with control need to be reminded, and we need to remind our souls that it is God who is God and not me. And not only is that a hard truth, but it is a freedom. It is a freedom. We find sometimes that our souls carry burdens they were not meant to bear because they're God-sized, not Andrew-sized. Do you know that you can carry a burden bigger than your soul? Have you ever felt that? About adult children whose lives you can't change? About a job that's going so well that you can't keep pace with it? Or maybe it's world peace or hunger or a nation unsure about its future. There are things bigger than your soul. And there are some times when you have to say, be still and know that God is God. Regardless of who you voted for, if you're a Christian, your hope is not in any person. Your hope is in God. It's not in the government. It's not in the plan. It's not in wealth. It's not in your spouse. It's not in your kids. Those things are all temporary. Your hope is in God. So, I invite you, not just because of this week, but because of who you and I are, to learn what it means to be still and know that I am God. As you came in, many of you were passed out a slip of paper. If you didn't get one, the ushers will be happy to give you one. If you didn't, you can raise your hand. There are pencils in the pews. I'm going to ask you this. I'm going to ask you to write down one thing you'd like to give to God. It could be about our nation. It could be about your life. And if you want to write down more than that, go for it. Go for it. But I'm going to ask you, and what we're going to do is the ushers are going to come by with a basket. They're going to put it in a basket. We're going to put it up here. We're going to pray over it, and we're going to remind our souls that God is God. And we are not.